Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Kaf Zayin. We're going to start our daf with just finishing up the last sugya with the last question in the series of questions that we saw in the previous daf. So starting from the very bottom of Kaf Vav Amud Bet. By Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Ivarim shesidram b'tzidei hamaracha mahu. If you put the Ivarim and you put them next to burn next to the fire, does that work? Ali b'demand amal al mamash lo tibaylach. Now they clarify the question. If you hold that al means really on, then obviously there's no question. Because what does the pasuk say? V'archu b'nei Aharon et netachim, the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, I skipped the word HaKohanim, they set up the netachim, the parts of the meat, etarosh v'etapadel, al ha'itzim asher ala esh asher ala mizbeach. Remember, on the wood, which is on the fire, which is on the mizbeach, seems very clearly it has to be on the wood directly. But But some people translate al as being on, meaning next to. Okay, this comes up, Rashi tells us, it comes up in Perek Shtei Alechem, further on in the Masechet on Daf Tzadivav. And in the Mishna, there's a machloket, and Rashi doesn't tell us the whole thing, but if you look there, the reason to say that al means next to is because in the camping in the desert, it says va'alav matem menashet, which is understood as, right, this is the camping, they camped next to Shevet Menashe, right? They were explaining who camped next to who. Alav there is next to, so al in general means next to. So if you say that, do you say hachanami also here al b'samuch, o dilma, or maybe here's an exception to the rule. Even though you could say al generally means next to, in this case it says ala eitzim dumi ada ala mizbech. It says on the wood, which is like on the altar. Now, nobody thinks it could be put next to the altar. The only question is, could it be put next to the wood? But if you look at the pasuk and you say, hey, it says on the wood, which is on the fire, which is on the altar, well, mahatam al mamash. Now, on the mizbeach, on the altar, it has to be really on the altar. Av hachanami al mamash. Maybe we would say the same thing here, and therefore we're left with a question. Teku, we don't have an answer to this question. Okay, new Mishnah. HaKometz, mi'utom akevet rubo. We're now going to say Mishnah where we learned parts of this before, definitely also parts of the next Mishnah, which is all sorts of things, what is essential, what is not essential. And then what the Gemara is going to do is say, okay, well, how do we know this is essential? How do we know that's essential? And we go back to general principles we've seen throughout, which is if something's repeated twice, then, or repeated, you would say, if something's repeated, that means it's essential. And there's certain words that are indicators, even when it's not repeated, that these are essential tasks. So we're going to go through one by one, both this Mishnah and the next. HaKometz. So the Kometz has to, in the Kometz, what is essential here? Mi'utom akev rubo. Okay, we're going to talk about other things, but right now they're going to say, if you're missing any part of it, it prevents the majority of it. You can't say, oh, I have most of the Kometz, I lost some of it. Okay, that doesn't work. Isaron, the measurement of how much has to be in the dough, mi'utom akev rubo. Again, any less than an isaron for the mincha offerings, where you need an isaron, any less is not going to work. Hayayin, wine. Okay, wine has its own measurements, okay? Right? Rashi reminds us of this. We say this in our davening, shlishit hahin shel ayil, revi'it hahin lekeves, v'chatzi hahin lepar. Right? A third of a hin, which is 4 log for the ram, revi'it hahin, a quarter, which is 3 log for the sheep, and half a hin, which is 6 log for the par. Hin is 12 log. That wasn't clear. So again, if you're missing any amount for the libations, it doesn't work. Hashemin, miutoma keft rubo. Okay, the oil that has to go in the offering. Again, it could be a log, it could be 3 log, depending on which offering, but the exact amount has to be right. Hasolet v'hashemin ma'agvin ze'etzeh. The fact that you need in minchas, again, the ones where you need it, both the flour and the oil, that's essential. If you have flour without oil, oil obviously without flour, no mincha offering. HaKometz v'halavona ma'akvin ze'etzeh. We have to burn the kometz, you have to burn the lavona. We had a long discussion about this previously, about their matirs. They both permit the eating of the remainder. So without that, you don't fulfill your obligation, and obviously you also, the kohanim can't eat the remainder. So now the Gemara starts off with the kometz. HaKometz, it doesn't say it, but the note says you should add that word. Okay, it's obviously missing from the printed text here. My taima, what's the reason? Amarkra, melo kumtso tre zimne. Okay, it mentions melo kumtso, you need a full handful. It mentions it both in the mincha nedava, the voluntary offering, and also in the mincha chote, the one the sinner's mincha offering in Vayikra chapter 5. So it says it twice. From there you learn it's essential. As per Rav's statement earlier, anytime it says it twice, it's essential. Isaron miutoma kevdrubo, my taima, amarka misalta. This also we had before. From its solet. It could have just said from solet. Why does it say its solet? Means she'im chisra koshu psulat. It has its own measurement of solet, and if you don't put that right amount in, it's not valid. Hayayim miutoma kevdrubo. Why? Because it says kacha. Okay, here's in the libations. Kacha yaseh l'shor ha'echad o la'ayel ha'echad o l'sebek vasim o bizim. Right, this is what you should do, and then it proceeds to tell you exactly how much. So there you see the amount of oil of wine that you need is essential. Hashemen miutom akevet rubo. Minchat nesachim. Okay, so now we're going to have oil. Depends which one. So in a minchat nesachim, the one that goes with the libations that we said in terms of how much for the par, how much for the ayel, how much for the keves. Well, kacha, again, the pasuk that introduced, where it then goes into detail about exactly how much for each one, starts off with kacha. Kacha means, right, this is how it's done. Uminchat nedava. What about a voluntary offering? Amarkra umishamna, just like we had misalta, umishamna, from its solet and from its oil. Its oil means it has to have exactly the right amount that it's supposed to have. She'im chisar kol shehu psula, that if you leave any amount, it's disqualified. Hashemen v'hasolet ma'akvin zeh. Now we're going to learn from the same pasuk that each one is an essential part because it says misalta umishamna, from its solet and from its oil. Also says migarsa umishamna. We learned this already also. The garsa are the grits, which is the parallel word for solet, that kind of flour that's supposed to be used with wheat. Well, also in a barley offering, in the omer offering, that's the pasuk where it says migarsa umishamna, it's talking about the omer sacrifice, which was brought with barley. Hakometz, so again, it says the same language. You need its garsa and its shamna, its oil, and its groats. So from there we learn. Like I said, grits before, I think it's also groats. I think it could be both. Anyway, not an expert in that, in the wording there. Hakometz v'halavona ma'akvin zeh zeh. The kometz and the lavona, how do we know? Al kol levonota ve'et kol levona asher ala mincha. So again, they quote two psukim. This one is, again, as many of the repeats. It's in chapter 2 and in chapter 6, which again, chapter 2 is toward Bnei Israel, and chapter 6 is with focus on the Kohanim. Repeats these issues, but there it says with its lavona and with its lavona, there it seems to be clear you need the kometz to come with the burning of the lavona, the frankincense. Okay, if you haven't had a chance to listen, since we're making mention of the frankincense and why it was so important in these offerings, there was shiurim, shiur of Gefet, specifically about the frankincense a few weeks back, so you can look up that to understand better about the lavona. Okay, new Mishnah. Shnei seirei Yom Kippurim ma'akvin zeh zeh. Okay, the two goat offerings on Yom Kippur are essential. You can't do the avodah Yom Kippurim without them. Shnei kivsei atzeret ma'akvin zeh zeh. In the special offering that you bring on Shavuot with the 2 loaves of bread, there are 2 sheep that are brought. Those 2 sheep are essential. You don't fulfill your obligation by bringing one without the other. Shtei chalot ma'akvot, so you need also the 2 lechems. Okay, if you bring your offering without the 2 breads, or you have one without, the truth is here they're really talking about the 2 chalot each other. You can't have one loaf without the other. Shnei starim ma'akvin zeh zeh. Obviously, the lechem apanim, there's 12 loaves. There's 6 in one set and 6 in the other set. If you remember, they go on the shulchan. There's 2 sets on the shulchan. They sit in bunches of 6. If you have one without the other, and obviously, if you're missing a loaf in one of them, it's no good. Okay, none of them are valid. Here, they also seem to say that you can't put them on the table unless you have them all there. Shnei bezichin ma'akvin zeh zeh. You need the 2 bowls of frankincense. Okay, these are 2 bowls that they would bring. They would put lavona, frankincense, on the table. Here it also seems to say, you can't put one on if you don't have the other. Okay, hastarim b'habizichim akvin zeh. Not only that, but you can't put the bread on unless the frankincense is there. You can't put the frankincense unless the bread is on. If you remember, they had kohanim holding these and kohanim holding those, and they would put them on. There was a whole special way they did it, so there was always bread on the table. This all is essential that everything be on kind of at the same time also. Shnei minim shebenazir. Now we're going to have a long list. Okay, I want to point out that it started off with, the first Mishnah was the kometz, the saron, the shemen. These were all singular items. Our Mishnah starts off with 2s, things that are 2 things. Okay, we had a list of 2s. We're going to go to 3, 4, 7. Okay, that's going to be our list. It's all numerical and it goes up in number, and that's what determines the order. So now we get to Shnei Minim Shebenazil, another two, which is the two types of loaves. You need rikikim, which are these lafa type breads. It's like a pita kind of thing. There are 10 loaves of those that go with the Nazir's offering, and there's 10 chalot matzot, which are loaves that are matzah loaves. They're kind of like a pita. Okay, so those are essential. Shlosha shebepara, three types of things that go with the para aduma. Again, you have one without the other, it's no good. Okay, all of these are things that are invalid without the other. This, you need the Eitz Erez, which is the cedar tree. You need a branch of a cedar, a zov, hyssop, and tolat shani, which is the red thread. Okay, red wool. Now that's all used for the para aduma ceremony. Arba'a shebetodah. There's four. Okay, now we move up. We went to 2. We just went to 3. 3 in the para. Now we're up to 4. 4 for the loaves. Okay, there's 4 types of loaves in the Todah offering. Okay, there's the 2 we just said in the Nazir. Then there's another 2. There's chalot that are chametz. Okay, so there's loaves that are actual chametz ones with a what do you call it? Like a sourdough in it, right? A type of yeast, not really yeast, but it is a fermenting agent, the word I was trying to find. And you have the murbechet, which is a different type of way of preparing, kind of like a bagel a little different, but you boil it, then you bake it, and then you fry it. Okay, so 4 types of loaves. Those are essential. You can't have without the other. You won't fulfill your obligation. You won't be permitted to eat the breads. You won't fulfill the korban that's brought with them. Okay, you need all 4 types. Arba'a lulav, you need all 4 types in the lulav, okay? The lulav, the etrog, the hadas, and aravot, you need all 4 types in the lulav, with the lulav. Arba'a shebemitzorah, ma'akvin ze'etzeh, okay? And the 4 in mitzorah are also ma'akiv. Now 3 are the 3 that you had in the para aduma, and there's an additional, which actually 2, but they call it 1 because it also needs 2 birds, okay? Now, those are also ma'akvin ze'etzeh. Now we get to 7. Sheva hazaot shebepara ma'agvot zoetzo. There are 7 sprinklings you have to do for the para aduma, which we're going to get to. You stand on Har HaZeitim, which is where they did the ceremony, and you sprinkle toward the Beit HaMikdash, and specifically toward the entrance to the Heichal. That's where you're facing when you do it, and you have to do all 7. Sheva hazayot shal bein abadim, shal parochet, shal mizbach hazahav, ma'agvot zoetzo. So now we have the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. There's 3 sets of sprinklings. 8. It's actually 8. It's not 7. It's a little bit weird. They say 7. It's, if you remember, 1 lamala and sheva lamata, right? Achad, achad v'shtayim, we say in our davening. So there's 7 that you do al bein abadim, between the badim of, you're standing between the poles of the aron. You do those 7. The ones that are on the parochet, which are also 8 and not 7. Okay, you also do, there inside you do 1 up and 7 down times 2, right? Because you do it with the blood of the par and the blood of the seir. Then you do it again on the parochet, the same 8, 1 up, 7 down. Some people say the reason why they said 7 is just because it goes with the 7 of the para aduma. Also, there's some that actually are 7, certainly not in the Kodesh Kodeshim, because only on Yom Kippur, but already when we get to Ala Parochet, we're also talking about the overlap between them and, if you remember, also the Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur and the Kohen HaMashiach. They also have these special sprinklings that you do of the blood toward the parochet, where you do actually 7. Okay, and maybe because it's 7 down and only 1 up, maybe they view the one as a little bit separate. Anyway, all those, and Sha'al Mizbech HaZahav, and then you do these sprinklings on the Mizbech HaZahav, which there's 7. On Yom Kippur, they actually do 4, and then they do 7. Anyway, all those bloods, those sets of bloods, are ma'akev each other. You have to have all the numbers of the ones you have to have. And each set is ma'akev the other. If you don't do all of them, then you don't fulfill your obligation of doing the avodah on Yom Kippur. Okay, so now we're going to go one by one, all these things and where the sources. So again, just like the previous Mishna, we had a list. And then the Gemara went into, how do we know that these are essential? Shnei sirei Yom Kippurim ma'akvin zeh. Here comes our other rule we haven't gone back to yet, which is chukah. If it says chukah, remember if it says Torah, it's not enough, but if it says chukah, it means it's essential. So by the end of the Yom Kippur service, it says chukah, and from there we learn really that all these things in Yom Kippur, which we're going to use to quote about the blood, and here as well. Shnei kivsei atzeret makvin ze et ze havaya. Okay, where does it say that? It says, Heinifa kohenotam, you have to wave them. Okay, and then it says, right, Lifnei Hashem, on the shnei kvasim, that's the two breads you have to wave with the two kvasim, the two sheep. Kodesh yihiyeh laHashem lakohen. So the word yihiyeh means this has to be. Okay, again, it's not the simple reading of it, but it is a word that we've used before, like zotia Torah Mitzaraf, you remember? Havaya there also. It's the same root. We're going to get back to that one soon. Shtei chalot, havaya, same thing. It's the exact same pasuk. It talks about the breads and it talks about the sheep. So that's all learned from the same pasuk. Shnei starim, here we're going to learn also the starim and the bezichim are also learned from the same pasuk. Chuka, shnei bezichim, chuka. Okay, this is pasuk Vayikra 24, verse 9. Vaital Aaron ubanav, so this bread is for Aaron and his sons. Vachlu b'makom kadosh, ki kodesh kodashim hu meishe Hashem, chok olam. Okay, this is a rule forever, and before that it mentioned the bezichim, the bowls with the frankincense, so it's all, the word chukah relates to all of that. Hastarim ve'abezichim, and obviously the combination of the two, not just that each set of loaves or each bowl of frankincense is essential, right? They both have to be there, but also the fact that you need both that, and you can't have the bread without the frankincense, you can't have the frankincense without the lavona, is also learned from the same word chukah. Shnei minim shebenazil, dichtiv ken yaseh. This we saw before also. Okay, in an earlier sugya, it said ken yaseh, so Torah Nazir, etc., etc. Asher yidor ken yaseh al Torah nizro. This is what he will do about his nizirut. So that's a word of stress, stressing how important it is to do it. Shlosha shebepara chukah. Okay, that's parshat chukat. That starts paraduma. There you have chukah. So chukat Torah. Arba'a shebetodah. Ditakish l'nazir. We saw as well a few dapim ago. It's parallel to nazir. Birtiv al zevach todat shlamav. And Amar Mar shlamav l'rabot shalmei nazir. And they said, right, the shlamim, right, this was on Yud Tet. So the al zevach shlamav, why does it say on his zevach of his shlamim? He only brings one shlamim. The shlamim is a reference to the nazir. Okay, so when we're talking about the todah, it mentions also reference to the nazir, and the nazir we learn from Ken Yaseh, so here also it's essential just like that. I mentioned this just before, Zot tihiyeh Torah mitzorah, because it says tihiyeh, it's therefore essential. Arba'a shebelulav ulekachtem, you should take, right, the arba minim, that's the pasuk, ulekachtem lechem, bayom harishon, take on the first day, and then it mentions the 4 species you're supposed to take. Likichatama. Now they darshan likachtem likichatama. The end tem they understand as tama, complete. That means you have to have all 4 of them. Now we're going to stop for a minute because Rav Chanan bar Rava, not stop, but we're going to digress for a minute into this one. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava lo shanu ela she'em lo, aval yesh lo em ma'akvim. He says it's only ma'akev if you don't have. But it doesn't mean you have to take them all at once. Okay, now we normally, right, you hold them all at once. According to Rav Chanan, he says it means that if you own, let's say you don't have an etrog, okay? So you live somewhere where it's really hard to find an etrog, but you manage to find all the others. So that's what he means, it's ma'akev. But if you have all 4 and you pick up some and then you pick up the others separately, that's not a problem. Meitive, the Gemara says, wait a minute, isn't there a Tannaitic source that disagrees with this? What Rav Chanan bar Rava said, Arba'a minim shebelulav, shnayim mehem osim perot, ushnayim mehen en osim perot. First of all, this is interesting. It splits it into 2. There's 2 categories. There's ones that bear fruits, the etrog and the hadassim, and there's ones because there's berries that grow on them, and there's ones that don't have fruits, the lulav and the aravot. So, haosim perot, they say, haosim perot, use kukim l'she'en osim. The 2 that make fruits need the other 2. And she'en osim perot use kukim l'osim perot. And the ones that don't bear fruit need the ones that bear fruit. Okay, each set of 2 needs the other 2. Ve'en adam yotzei yedei chofato behen ad shu kulam b'aguda achat. And they say you don't fulfill your obligation unless they're all together. Now that seems to say they're ma'akvin zeh et zeh, even if you have them all in front of you, right? If you don't take them together, it's a problem. That goes against what Rav Chanan said. Here's a nice way this source ends before we get back to resolving this contradiction. V'chein Yisrael b'hartza'ah. Okay, this is the famous, if you don't remember seeing this inside ever, but here it is. This is the Jewish people when they look for ritzui, they want to get appeased, they want to pray to God, okay, and get forgiveness. Ad shiu kulam ba'aguda achat. It's a beautiful idea. They have to all be together. Shene'amar haboneh b'shamayim aliyotav va'agudato al eretz yisada. Okay, they quote this pasuk that God builds in the shamayim his ma'alot, his importance, va'agudato, and his bond, the bonds, al eretz yisada. Right? The world is the foundation of the world is on this bond. People have to be bound together. This is a big issue in our day, right? The people are not so bound together, and there's a lot of inner fighting, right? This is not good. This is not good for the Jewish people. It's not good for anybody, right? So basically, that's what they're saying. When you want to go ask for forgiveness or get appeasement, everyone needs to be baguda achat. Rashi says, like when you're fasting, when you're looking for that kind of help from God, you need to be bound together, just like the lulav. Anyway, the point being, very nice idea, but the point being here that the lulav, it sounds like they all have to be together. It doesn't help. They are matvin zed, even if you have them all in front of you against what he said, to which we answer tonight, it's a machloket tanaim. Tanya, it says in a braita, lulav bein agud bein she'eno agud kashel. According to Tanakama, it doesn't have to be bound. Okay, either which way it's good. Rabbi Yehuda omil agud kashel she'eno agud pasul. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, if it's not agud, it's disqualified. So here you see that it breaks down into this machloket. The braita we just saw is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Has to be agud, has to be bound together, and they all have to be held together. But if you hold like the rabbis, that's Rav Chanan, it doesn't have to be. Okay, now you might be thinking, wait, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda against the rabbis because we hold that you need to bind them. Well, we're going to see. My time at Rabbi Yehuda. So where does Rabbi Yehuda? First, we're going to see where he gets it from. Well, Gamar kicha me agudat ezov. Okay, it says kicha when it talks about the agudat ezov. Okay, which you take. This is in Lakachtem agudat ezov. Okay, this is in Shmot when they took another hyssop branch. They took the hyssop branch and what they do, they were told dip it in the blood. Ulakachtem agudat ezov utfaltem badam. Right, and then paint it on the mashkof. Right, use it to paint the blood on the door on the mezuzah. Right, on the door frame, so that God will know which houses to pass over. So now they say, there it says ulakachtem agudat ezov, and what's an agudat ezov? It's bound together. That's an agudat. It's bound together, and it says lekicha. So it also says lekachtem in the arba minim. So malahalan the lulav and etrog. So malahalan baguda avkan baguda. So just like that is together, this also has to be bound together. Obviously, the lulav is bound with the hadasim and aravot. It's not bound with the etrog, but the point also being you take them at the same time. So now that's the rabbi's opinion. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Where do the rabbis get it from that you don't need this? Rabbanan lo gamre kicha kicha. They just don't have that Xera Shava. We've learned many times that not everybody holds by every Xera Shava. Kimanas lahadatanya, according to who does the following braita go? Lulav mitzvah la'agdo v'im lo agdo kashel. But wait, this is confusing. Because the rabbis say you don't need eged. Rabbi Yehuda says you do. But this source says if the lulav, it's a mitzvah to do it, but if you don't do it, it's okay. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said it's disqualified if you don't do it, and the rabbis say you don't need to do it. So, kiman, ika Rabbi Yehuda lo agdo my kasher. If you didn't do it, why is it good? I Rabbanah, my mitzvah. If it's the rabbis, then there is no mitzvah. They never said there was a mitzvah. To which because they don't even have that Xera Shava to connect to binding it together. Well, la'olam Rabbanan, my mitzvah, mishum ze eli v'amveu. Even according to the rabbis, it looks nicer if you take them all together, right? If you're imagine trying to hold your four things, right, with the lulav and the hadasim and aravot in your hand, it's messy, right? The binding them together, which is right that thing that we buy that goes at the bottom of the lulav, or not necessarily buy, it usually comes with your lulav, but that brings them all together. Without that, you basically, right, it organizes it. It makes it pretty. It's hard to do a mitzvah when everything's messy and things are falling all over the place. Sheva haza'ot shebepara. Okay, so we finished now with the arba minim for Sukkot. Now we're moving on to the sheva haza'ot shebepara ma'akvot zoetzo. Very simply, chukah, again, by paradum it says chukah. That's how we get it. Sheva haza'ot she'al ben abadim v'sha'al mizbach hazahav v'sha'al parochet. Okay, the ones that are between the poles of the Aron, facing the Aron. We have the ones that are on the Mizbeach, the golden Mizbeach in the sanctuary, and on the Parochet, toward the Parochet, Arma Akvotzo Etzo. So we have to differentiate between Yom Kippur and the Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur and Par Kohanim Mashiach. Yom Kippur Ktiv Chukah, that we know. It says Chukah, we already got that. Depar Kohen Mashiach who depar them davar shel tzibur. These are all the sins that the community makes because of a mistaken, erroneous ruling, or the Kohen Gadol makes based on his own erroneous ruling. And the ones for idol worship, okay, this was all spent a lot of time in Horayot, if you learned Horayot, Kiditanya, as it says in the following braita, and by the way, we learned a lot of this in Zvachim as well. Va'asa lapal kasher asa lapal. So first, it describes what you're supposed to do in the par hadran davar shel tzibur after it already described what to do for the par Kohen HaMashiach, the Kohen Gadol. Then, after it described kind of very similar things, it says, and do to this par like you did to the previous one, the one in the previous section. Now, it was kind of superfluous to say this. So, matamud lamar, lichpol bahazaot. They wanted to tell you, oh, this is like a repeat of sprinklings. And from there we see, it repeated. Again, we're back to that theory. If it repeats, then it means it's essential. Turning now to Amabet, again, they're saying it now, just spelling it out. That if you're missing one of the placements of blood, then it's as if you didn't do anything. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to go into a braita, and we're going off topic, not off topic completely, but we're stopping with what we've been doing about finding all the sources. And then we say, we're going to learn about these hazaot, these 7 sprinklings that you do with the para aduma. So sheva hazaot shebepara sha'asa'an bein lishman bein shalom mechuvanot psulot. Okay, I think I read this right. I hope para sha'asa'an bein shalom lishman. Whether you did them not with the right intent of why you were sprinkling them. So again, you're standing on Har HaZitim, you're facing toward the Beit HaMikdash. And, right, you're supposed to be facing the entrance to the Heichal, mamash, looking in that space. Whether you did it without the right intent, or whether you did it not actually facing specifically where you're supposed to be facing, psulot, they're disqualified. So if you do one of those ways, completely disqualified. V'shebifnim, v'shebemitzorah, but when you're doing the sprinklings inside of the par davar shel tzibur, the par, all those, and the Sheba Mitzorah, the Mitzorah also there's sprinklings you have to do inside the Heichal. Shelo lishman psulin, shelo mechuvanot kshirot. If you do them for the wrong reason, or you do them not in the right direction, you're supposed to do them toward the parochet. Parochet is that divider between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. So now if you did it in the wrong direction, or without the right intent, okay, so here we're going to differentiate. Not the right intent, major disqualification. But not the right direction, it's okay. As long as you're in the sanctuary, it's fine, even if you didn't do it exactly toward the parochet. So now we're going to deal with the first one, the para aduma. The hatanya, but wait, there's a braita that seems to contradict. Hatanya gabe para, shelo lishman psulot, shelo b'chovanot kshirot. Actually, there's a braita that says that the para aduma is more like the Mitzorah and the shebifnim, which is, if you do it facing the wrong direction, it's actually okay. Only if you do it lo lishma for the intent of something else, like you thought, I'm sprinkling this for some other reason, it's a problem. So now, right, by the way, the para aduma, we're talking about the blood. You slaughter the para aduma, and then you take the blood and you sprinkle it. So now, Amar Rav Chisda, lo kashya. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbanan. So Rav Chisda says, don't worry. There's a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan, that's the first resolution to this contradiction. We're going to end our daf with a second resolution to this contradiction, but it's going to take us until the end of this daf to explain the machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, of what we're talking about, because we're going to have a long braita till we actually get to the important line. So you're going to kind of forget about this all very soon because you're going to get involved in this braita, but what we're really looking for is a resolution to the contradiction. We're going to say it's 2 different Tannaitic opinions. One says if you're facing the wrong direction, it's disqualified, and one says it's not disqualified for the para aduma ceremony, when you're slaughtering the red heifer and preparing the para aduma waters. So here we're going to read this braita. Again, we're going to get to a different topic right now, and eventually we're going to see how it connects. Mechusarei kapara shenichnesu la'azara b'shogeg chayav chata b'mezid anush karet. If you're a mechusar kapara, that means you went through a process like a Mitzorah, a Nazir, a Zav, a Zava, Yoledet, okay? Actually not a Nazir, I think, but a Zav, Zava, Yoledet, Mitzorah. And after your 7-day purification process, then you have to bring a korban or a set of korbanot, depending on your situation. So you've already gone to the mikvah on the 7th day. You've already waited for the sunset. You're already pure. Okay, if you go to the mikvah in the morning, on the 7th day, you're called a tful yom. Then you become pure at night. Okay, you're still impure during the day. You're a status of a Tvul Yom, sort of an in-between. Then the next day, you still have to bring sacrifices. And until you bring those sacrifices, you're not allowed to come into the mikdash. It says it, for example, by the Yoled, El Mikdash L'Tavot. You can't go into the mikdash until you bring your sacrifices. So if you went in to the Azara, which you're not allowed to go, Mishogeg, if you did it accidentally, Chayav Chatat. So you bring a Korban Chatat because if you did it intentionally, which we'll see in a minute, B'mezid Anush Karet. You get karet for it. So anything you get karet if you do intentionally, if you do unintentionally, you get you bring a chatat. Ve'ein sarich lomar tful yom ushar kol atmeim. And you don't even need to say the tful yom and other tmeim. Okay, obviously any of those is going to be karet or chatat if you do it accidentally. Utehorim. Now, what if you're this big debate here? Rashi says we're talking about if you're Yisrael who goes past the Ezra-Yisrael border. There's 11 amot into the Azara, which you're allowed to go. If you go past that, you're really not allowed to, although some commentators take issue with Rashi because they say, what do you mean? On Pesach, everybody slaughtered the Pesach in the Azara, and people were allowed to go. But it could be if you're going for no real reason. Okay, like you don't have a reason to be in there, you're not allowed to go past those first 11 cubits into the room. That's why it's called the Ezra-Yisrael. Or, seems more likely though, even though Rashi says this, but most of the other commentaries say we're talking about a Kohen who's tahor, because in a minute you'll see we're talking about going into the Heichal, into the sanctuary. We're not talking about 12 amot into the room. Tehorim shenichnesu lifnim mimechitzatam. If you're pure and you went past the place you're allowed to go, laheichal kulo ba'arba'im. You go into the sanctuary, you get 40 lashes. It's a lo taseh. Mibeit la parochet el pnei kaporet b'mita. If you go though into the Kodesh Kodashim, or you go now it's unclear what this in-between stage is. I'm going to tell you the possibilities. Or you go to Pnei Kaporet, which is you're standing facing the Aron in the Kodesh Kodashim. Okay, so what's Mibeit La Parochet, which means behind the Parochet, because the Parochet's the separator. Seems like, first of all, there were two curtains. You would go behind one curtain, then walk in between the two curtains. The Kohen would go in. When he would go in, the entrance was on one side. He would then walk all the way to the other side, okay, from north to south. I forget if he goes in on the south and then the north or the north. I think he goes in on the south side and then walks all the way to the north and then enters the Kodesh Kodashim from there. Now, at that point, he's not exactly opposite the Aron because the Aron's centered of the room and he's all the way on the north side. But I think the way you would explain it is, so either it's in between the curtains where you're kind of already past the Parochet, so you're in the Kodesh Kodashim, or perhaps when you enter the room before you actually stand opposite the Aron. And then there's opposite the Aron. So there's three stages here, and this is really important to understand for the whole next section of the Gemara. We have the Heichal, which is the sanctuary. Then we get to the corridor that's basically taking us from one to the other. I'm actually just going to quickly pull up the picture. I forgot to do this before, so give me a second. Pull up the picture, and then we will see. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. See the map, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about here. So here's our map. Okay, so here we're in the sanctuary, and you're basically going to go, this is as big as I can. Okay, you're basically here. Yeah, here's the south side. So you're going to go in the south side, in between the two curtains, come out on the north, and then you're going to be here. But you're not, when you're facing the Aron, you actually have to be, right, facing the Aron is in this space. So it could be we're talking about all the other space in this room if you're not facing the Aron. And it could be we're talking maybe in between the curtains. Okay, unclear exactly, but we have section 1, which is this area. Okay, that's 1, that hole where I put a big X. Then we have, perhaps this area, okay, somewhere around there. And then we have where I put the third X. So according to Tanakama, we're going to have Lehechal kulo ba'arba'im. This is 40 lashes. Okay, that's the rabbis. Then, mibeit la parochet el pnei kaporet, anywhere here is going to be mita. Okay, death. You're going to get the death penalty for going into this area. Now, we're talking, by the way, about a Kohen who's pure, but I didn't stress this before, but has no purpose to be there. Obviously, the Kohen can go into the sanctuary. Now, a Kohen can never go into the Kodesh Kodashim unless it's a Kohen Gadol, but the Kohen Gadol can only do it if it's Yom Kippur, right? So, basically, this is what's going to be happening. You're going to get 40 lashes, or you're going to get the death penalty. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol echal kulom umi beit la parochet ba'arba'im. Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, no, Rabbi Yehuda, I'm going to put in blue. He says this is 40. Okay, he agrees with that. He says this is also 40. And only here are you going to get mita. Okay, so basically, maybe I should pull this in a little better now with the red. The rabbis are going to say here it's mita. Okay, here it's death. Okay, so that's our big machloket. This space where you're not yet really fully in you're not in the Kodesh Kodeshim facing the Aron, but you are in the Kodesh Kodeshim. What's the root of their debate? So Bahaikra, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Daber al Aaron Achicha, Va'al Yavo b'chol et el Kodesh, Mibeit la Parochet el Pnei HaKaporet asher al Aaron v'lo yamut. It's a very strange pasuk. Hashem says to Moshe, speak to Aaron, your brother, and tell him, don't come whenever you want to the Kodesh, right? This is in the stuff about Yom Kippur. You can't always come just on Yom Kippur, right? Don't go El Kodesh, don't go Mibeit la Parochet, and don't go El Pnei HaKaporet. He says all three of those areas. Okay, now, Asher al Aaron, right, the kaporet, which is on the Aaron, v'lo yamut. Now, it starts off with a lo taseh, and it moves into, but you'll get killed. So the question is where to divide that pasuk, because there's three things, and there's obviously lashes for something, death for something, and obviously lashes for the first, death for the last. What about the middle one? That's where our big debate becomes. So Rabbanan savre el kodesh below yavo. Mi beit la parochet ve'el pnei kaporet below yamut. We put the break after el kodesh. The kodesh is the heichal. Right, this whole area, that's the heichal. That we're going to say is lo yavo. It's just a lo taseh. On lo taseh is that you do actions with, you get lashes. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ela kodesh umibeit la parochet below yavo. No, the Ela kodesh and mibeit la parochet is below yavo. He's going to say the lo yavo relates to this area and the entrance into the other area. Right, then the last part below yamut, mibeit la parochet below yamut. Sorry, Vel Pnei HaKaporet below yamut. Okay, my time at Rabbanit. So now they're going to go and do a whole thing into this pasuk and try to understand why each one darshans the pasuk differently. So the rabbis say, remember, the rabbis say the first part is going to be, second, right? Remember, okay, I lost all my notes there, I see. Okay, anyway, the first part, according to the rabbis, El HaKodesh below yavo, right? And el pnei kaporet below yamut. Okay, sorry, mibeit la parochet. They're going to say only the first part is a lo taseh. Everything else is death. Now, why do they say that? Isal gadata kedamar Rabbi Yehuda. If you want to say it like Rabbi Yehuda says, then we're going to say lichta rachamana el kodesh ve'el pnei kaporet. It should have just said el kodesh, and okay, if you're going to be Rabbi Yehuda, it should have said el kodesh and el pnei kaporet. And you don't even need to say, V'lobayim mibeit la parochet. It should have given both extremes. Okay, you can argue with this theory. Okay, but again, if you want to be Rabbi Yehuda, who says you get 40 lashes for the first two, then it just should have given both extremes. And you would have said, you didn't need the middle case. V'ana amina, and it's telling you, you're going to get lashes for going into the heichal. You're going to get killed for what? For seeing the kaporet, for being opposite the Aron Kodesh, which would imply, what about the middle space? Well, since it doesn't say death there, well, it doesn't say anything really. Well, it can't be worse than it can't be better than the heichal. So they're going to say, Anamina heichal mechayve mibeit la parochet mebaya. If you're already liable 40 lashes for going into the first area, then obviously you're going to be liable for going even past that. And it only says death when it comes to the last one. So that would only be the death one. So, mibeit la parochet, dikata rachman alam. So come the rabbis and they say, so why is they add the middle case? Must be, shma mina b'mita. Must be to tell you, you also get the death penalty. Okay. Not the most convincing argument. Rabbi Yehuda says, ikata rachman ela kodesh, v'lo kata mibeit la parochet. But if it said, now here's Rabbi Yehuda's retort to what they're saying. Right now, we're just trying to prove what's the logic of the rabbi's position? And to say it, we have to say, well, what's Rabbi Yehuda going to say to that? So Rabbi Yehuda will say, if it just said ala kodesh and it didn't say v'lo katav mibeit parochet, like the rabbis tried to just prove why, that must be there to say it gets death. Right? So hava amina, I would have thought my kodesh. Maybe I would have thought kodesh is mibeit la parochet. Maybe kodesh isn't the sanctuary. Maybe I would have thought Kodesh is farther, and maybe I would have mistakenly thought that Aval Heichal Lav Namilo. Maybe there's not even a lo taseh to go into the Heichal for no reason. So that's why you can't prove it from there. Well, what are the rabbis going to say? There's no way you could suggest that Kodesh is not the Heichal, because Heichal Kulo Ikre Kodesh. The Heichal is always called Kodesh. How do we know? Shneimar vivdila parochet lachem ben Kodesh uben Kodesh Kodeshim. It says in the pasuk very clearly, the parochet, that divider there, is specifically there, the curtain, to differentiate between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. Kodesh is obviously Heichal. Therefore, the rabbis say we disagree with what you're saying. Okay, that's all the rabbis' position. But again, they said the middle part's unnecessary. It must be there to tell you that the middle part you actually get death for. Rabbi Yehuda, my time. So what's his reason? If the rabbis are right, it just should have said numbers 1 and 2 in the pasuk. Ela kodesh and mi beit la parochet, you get killed, because then obviously if you get killed mi beit la parochet, where you haven't even faced the Aron yet, v'lo bai el pnei hakaporet, you wouldn't need that at all. You'd know obviously I'm going to get killed if I do that, because I would say mi beit la parochet b'mita. If stage 2 you get killed, then el pnei hakaporet b'bai, you wouldn't even need to say stage 3. Obviously you're going to get the death penalty. So el pnei hakaporet tekata rachman alamali. So what's that verse coming to teach you? That phrase, Shma mina, al pnei hakaporet b'mita, mi beit la parochet b'asara. So the fact that they mentioned stage 3 gets death, it's only stage 3 gets the death penalty, not anywhere before that. Anywhere before that is going to be 40 lashes. The Rabbanan, so what are the rabbis going to say to Rabbi Yehuda's argument? Haneinami delot sarich. Really, you don't need that. V'hada, you didn't really need that last section, you're right. Hai dekata rachman el pnei hakaporet lemiute derech mishupash. It's actually here to teach something completely different. That if you come in from the side, okay, you don't come in the normal way, like I showed you before. You don't come in walking in from the east, okay, this way. Okay, you're going to come in, instead of coming this way into the Kodesh Kodeshim, right, where you have to go then through the curtains and going that way. No, you come in from some side way. Okay, how you get in from some side way, I'm not so clear. But if you come in from some other way, you're not going to be liable. Kedetani debate Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, al pnei hakaporet kedma. Okay, this is a different pasuk. This is saying he takes the dama par be'etzba'o al pnei hakaporet kedma v'lifnei hakaporet yazeh. So he goes facing the Aron, and it says al pnei hakaporet zeh bana'av kol makom shneimar pnei eno ela pnei kadim. When it says al pnei hakaporet, what it means is from the east. Okay, so he says, right, that's where he gets this from, right? So they're saying, just like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, also the rabbis say it, and they learn from el pnei. Pnei hakaporet is there to teach you that it has to be from the east, just like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov just said. Rabbi Yehuda lemakra pnei. So what's he going to say? Yeah, well, if it wanted that, it would have just said the word pnei. My el, the word el pnei hakaporet is unnecessary. Okay, we're slowly getting to why we wanted to be here, as you can see, because we're almost at the end of the daf. My el, shma mina el dafka. El means it has to be that way. That's where we get it. So from there, so it could have just said pnei. What does el mean? El means it has to be that way. Okay, and that's how we get that. It means two things according to Rabbi Yehuda. Both that you have to go in that particular way, and that you have to, that it's, that whole phrase is unnecessary to teach you, only you're going to get the death penalty for that. Rabbanan el lav dafka. Now the rabbis say el is not dafka. That's why they don't learn it. They don't learn what Rabbi Yehuda learns from there, that it's teaching you that you're only going to get the death penalty for that case. Now, Rabbi Yehuda de Amar el pnei hakaporet dafka. Here goes our case. Now we had this braita about the paraduma, and we said what? The paraduma, if you do it not in the right direction, it's either pasul or it's kasher. So how do we explain that? One is the rabbis, one is Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because what does it say? Rabbi Yehuda says, al pnei hakaporet is dafka. Well, what does it say in paraduma? V'hiza el nochach. Nami dafka. It has to be done in that way. If you don't do it nochach, ol moed, which is facing the ol moed, facing the entrance to the heichal, when you're standing at Har HaZeitim, you're far, but you have to be facing in that direction when you do the sprinkling. Well, it's not going to work. And Rabbanan say like this, midahatam lav dafka. If you don't say el pnei hakaporet is dafka, then you're not going to say it here either. And then they're going to say, right, hachanami lav dafka. It's also not specifically needed here. Okay, in the paraduma. And that's how we're going to explain the resolution to this contradiction, the first resolution. Matkev la Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, what are you talking about? The Rabbi Yehuda mida el dafka, al nami dafka. Wait, if you're going to say el is dafka, then al is also going to be dafka. Now, we're going to have a problem. Because Ela de Mikdasheni de lo hava aron u kaporet. Second temple, there was no aron and kaporet. Hachanami de lo avid hazaot. What, they didn't do hazaot because it says al pnei hakaporet. And in Masechet Yoma, right, it says that Yoshiyahu hid away the aron even before the end of the first temple period. And yet it says they obviously sprinkled. We know from Masechet Yoma they sprinkled in the second temple period time. And yet it says you have to sprinkle hizab etzbo al pnei hakaporet. Sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is going to say it has to be. Now, we didn't have the aron and kaporet, so how do you explain that? Amar Rabber Ula Amar Krava Chiperet Mikdash HaKodesh Makom HaMikudash LaKodesh. Because it says Chiperet Mikdash HaKodesh, they say in the Avot of Yom Kippurim, it's pasuk in Vayikra Tetzayin there. It's the Mikdash HaKodesh, the place where it's sanctified. Not, you don't have to do it on the aron. It's a separate pasuk to teach that, and therefore it's okay. We're just going to end with Rava's answer to the contradiction. He's going to say it's not Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan and whether El is Dafka or not. He's going to give a different explanation. Hava ha-Rabbanan. We can explain both according to the rabbis who don't think El is Dafka, but Haidekai Mizrach Umara v'adeh v'Haidekai Tzfon v'Darom v'adeh. You don't actually have to face the exact entrance. You should face the entrance to the Ohel Moed, but as long as you're facing in the general direction of facing east, then you're, facing west, panav l'marav, because there you're facing west toward the Kodesh, you're facing toward the Beit HaMikdash, even if you're not exactly, when you're sprinkling, facing the entrance to the Heichal, but you're in the general direction, then you're okay. But if you're facing north-south, then you're completely off, and then that's going to be disqualified. And that's the second way of resolving that contradiction. Okay, let's do our summary. So we started with this last question about the al. Does it have to be actually on the fire, or can it be next to it? We don't have an answer to that question. And it was only if you think al could be near. Is it different here, though, because of the way the pasuk reads? Then we went through a whole list of all sorts of things that are ma'akev. And then we basically brought the sources for where we get it from. We got off on a few small tangents, like the arba meaning, and do you need egget or not? We got off on this tangent about the para aduma and whether the sprinkling has to be exactly toward Ohel Moed. And one source says yes, and the other source says no. And two ways to resolve, either like Rabbi Yehuda or the rabbis, or saying it depends if you're facing west or you're facing north-south. Okay, and with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.